Hello, everyone. I am Melissa Forzia. I'm a keynote speaker and the host of this Halt and Catch Fire rewatch podcast. Now, when I speak, my topic is something that I call Take the Doughnut, which for me is another way of saying carpe diem, go after the things you want. And one of the things that I wanted to do this year was to rewatch the show Halt and Catch Fire, but actually talk about it with other people, a real novelty for me. And that's been fun to do. And we've up-leveled this because I've had a chance to start talking with people who worked on this show. So before I introduce my interview guest for today, I just wanted to give you all one quick housekeeping item. If you are brand new to the show, the episode recaps are safe for you and spoiler-free up until the episode that you're on in that rewatch. These interviews could be spoiler-filled. We could bring up anything from any season. So I just wanted you to be aware of that before you dive in. This one might be okay, but we'll see how it goes, because I'm introducing now my guest for today, who is Chris Brown, who was the production designer for seasons 1 and 2 of Halt and Catch Fire. So welcome, Chris.
Hello, nice to be with you.
It's so great to have you here. I am really interested to learn about your role. But before we even talk about your specific role, I'm curious how you got connected with Halt and Catch Fire initially.
I would say my intro to the project came through the tentacles of the greater AMC family. I was working as the art director on Mad Men in 2013 and got a script and some contact information from my agent that, there was another period project that AMC was beginning to develop. And did I want to read and would I have any interest in meeting? And the answer was yes. All the more so knowing that the project was going to be set at the turn of the 80s, which for me as a Gen Xer is, like a sweet spot in my memory banks for, early teens. And that, so the decade is something that I have personal attachment to as well, which was one of the things to draw me in.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I think, there's a nostalgic factor there for so many of us. It's fun to work on a period piece. When I think of period pieces, I often think of like corsets, and it's nice to think of something that, you've had lived experience and see how that's reimagined.
It's a little sad when you realize it was 35 years ago, but there you go.
So it is. Yeah. I mean, okay. So when I knew that I was going to interview you, I thought to myself, what exactly does a production designer do? So I was looking into it a bit, but tell us more about what your job entailed, both maybe beforehand and once you got into the episode by episode work. I understand that you would have been creating a visual design for this show, but what specifically did that involve?
Well, I would say for Halt and Catch Fire, it's sort of a three-part harmony. There's a pilot phase because there was no order to series when the first script was produced. And there was, once the pilot had been achieved and delivered and AMC was receptive to making more, there was developing a longer arc to take us through, what the rest of season 1 would become. And then at the conclusion of season 1, there's no guarantee there's a season 2. But the end of 1 leaves you with different directions for all of the characters, all the principals, in terms of what's happening to them, so that the arcs for and design opportunities for the second year were different than the asks were going to be from the first. Because yes, some stuff will carry over, but the spoiler alert is there's no Cardiff Electric office in season 2.
So the vibe really does change a lot going into season 2, actually, even though they're still in the same city.
Yeah. I mean, and so for me, I was involved at the pilot phase where, Juan Cabanella was attached to direct and, met with producers and Chris who created the project and, had a very nice meeting. And then I think I was on a plane to Atlanta from Los Angeles a week later to try and figure out how to find 1980s Dallas in the Hollywood South, which at the time was not the hotbed of production that it has evolved into in the last 10 years. It was sort of right on the cusp of lots of people and lots of projects going there. The incentives there had been in place, so they were drawing people in, but it was not lots of equipment, lots of deep crew space, lots of found and existing sound stages to work in. So a little bit of an Easter egg hunt to try and find the pieces that we needed to be able to make the series for season 1. But for the pilot, I think that I landed there and we only had about 4.5 weeks before we needed to go to camera. And that's a short, even for a pilot, that's a short turnaround time to get into and establish what you want to find and what you need to find to tell the story. The beauty of the pilot is usually you can push the schedule to meet the needs of the production and what the challenges are. And we knew we had to establish the Cardiff offices, the home for the Clarks, and then a whole bunch of other beats which would inform and launch the trajectories for the other characters. Dealing with commercial real estate is a slow-moving process. And so finding a space that we could transform, dress, take into the 1980s was, I would say, the biggest challenge of the pilot phase. Because you want to establish something which, assuming you have success and it goes to series, is going to be able to be developed and take you places, and you're going to live there for a good chunk of the first 8-9 episodes of the story. The second choice, or the second biggest thing, was finding the house for the Clarks, because again, that's domestic residence where you're going to spend time with the married couple and eventually their kids. And again, you need to have something that's flexible enough so that down the road you can tell additional story beyond just what's required on the page for the first 45 minutes of television. I think that we were successful in both. I think the bones that we found in the pilot translated well when we went to season 1, and we ended up building those environments on sound stages rather than finding them in real physical spaces out in the metro Atlanta area. I mean, the usual shenanigans that production designers do is you build an interior on a sound stage so that you can control everything, and you have a practical exterior for spaces to land the characters and their environments in and put them in the real world. We did that for both Cardiff and the Clark home, and we altered our approaches. The exterior that's in the pilot is not the exterior that's in the series. And the exterior for Cardiff that's in the pilot has some visual effects help to make it be what we wanted it to be, to make it feel more like Dallas and to have a little bit more scope and scale. But I think both those things were successful. To circle back to what your initial ask was, my job is to sort of shape the physical worlds for the characters, working with a director on a pilot for sure, or a film, and a director of photography in terms of how things are going to be shot. We have to create a space that the characters can and the camera can go through, but also spaces that are specific to who those people are, not just words on a page. And so when we started the show, there were sort of it was a sort of a three-part harmony again. You have Joe McMillan, who's sort of quintessential high polished, hard surface, aggressive 1980s. That was a conscious choice in terms of color. In his apartment, it's glass block, it's black, it's white, it's very very hard. There's a lot of polished veneer, which I think speaks to how Joe develops over the course of the series. We knew that we wanted Donna and Gordon to be softer, more textural. 1980, it's like, oh, it's the 1980s. But 1980 is really like 1976 and a half. You've got layers of things from their past lives, which they've traveled with as they've developed, started a family, bought a house, traveled, moved things. Maybe what did they get as a wedding gift from Donna's parents? What did they buy that was new? What's important to them? And so we use that sort of thinking to help provide a more embraceable space for them. And we're living in a color palette which is harvest golds, avocados, darker wood tones, not the classic 1980, golden oaks, which you would see if like you Google the 1980s kitchen and you can get, white formica and golden oak. We knew that we didn't want that to be the space that they were living in. And then Cameron is sort of the mysterious one in the pilot, plucked out of obscurity in school to, go become the resident computer genius. Who is she? What does she know? She doesn't even know, what does she know about herself? And so the discovery for her was in, trying different things on, style wise in her place of residence, which eventually evolved into like old house, new stuff, found things, found objects. It's college student living, having a college student child myself now. I see the same things that haven't changed in 40 years. It's all how, discovering what it is that you like to be around and with. But for the story, she's the innate digital person. Everybody else has come to that technology as adults, whereas she's living it and organically evolving with it. And we wanted to make sure that we were, representing that in the bits and pieces and details that we put into her spaces. Does that make sense?
It does. And so many interesting things that you just said there. I'm interested to know, when you first start on a project like this, I mean, the pilot, you have the pilot script, you know what's going to be in the pilot. But then when you move into season 1 and when you move into season 2, I can't imagine you're given all scripts up front and said, here's all the things that you need to get. So how do you approach getting information piecemeal?
I mean, you have to have a strong relationship with the writers and the producers. Everybody, especially doing a period show, which is not extravagantly resourced. You have to be smart about where you're spending your money, and time is just as important as dollars in a lot of instances. We were making this in 2013, looking at technologies that dated from the late 70s and early 80s. So, finding enough of the same type of computer terminal so that we could put something on desks in an office was a huge time suck, because what's available, let alone how do we want it to look, what does it have to do, what is it doing for the story, how are we making it a part of the world of the show. When you go to series, usually before you get a script, you'll get a breakdown, a treatment that'll tell you, these are the major beats. There's, maybe some particular lines that people have worked out, or interchanges between the characters that'll be on the page, but you'll get a sense of, what episodes 2, 3, and 4, what those story arcs are for those people and the places that you need to go, so that you can be out in front of what you're going to need to prepare and have more than just an 8-day pre-production window to find and deliver all that stuff. You're also making choices about what environments might repeat across multiple episodes in a season if you're going to build those on a soundstage. So, as I mentioned earlier, the transition, spoiler alert, the transition from 1 to 2 is the main Cardiff Electric office, which was a huge character in season 1, goes away, and we transition our focus into the Mutiny House, which had been found as a practical location space the later part of season 1, giving Cameron a found place to live. But we had to turn that into, a computer, a homemade computer internet hub workspace slash, digital fraternity house for season 2. And that was something that we built that on stage so that we could control the interiors. And then we added a backyard. And so we had to find a backyard that matched a house. And the backyard was 35 or 40 miles away from the front yard of the house. So there's becomes a dance of how you work with production to facilitate the needs of scenes that go from outside to inside to outside the back, or um, how those things get put together.
That Mutiny House, so we see all different, there's inside the house, like you said, there's the backyard. How many different locations are we actually looking at when we think about that house? Because we also see the front porch and we see the side of the house as well. Were those the same? How many different locations were actually involved in that?
There's the side house, backyard, deck, barn is one location. The front porch, and the first time you see the interiors in season 1, is a second location. The interior of the house for season 2, as well as probably 80% of the front porch beats. There's some transition moments where people are coming in and out, and their doorway scenes are a built environment on a soundstage.
Okay, that makes sense.
And so, if I'm recalling correctly, we modified or built the part of the deck on the backyard exterior to match the little shed roof piece that's off of the kitchen, so you could transition that and the architecture would feel the same. We didn't do anything substantial to the first location that we found, other than, I think, paint the interiors for color control on the walls, but no major architectural modifications.
Okay. So what would be the difference for you in how you approach working on a location versus like working on a set that's been built for this? Is there any, what practically are the differences for you?
It's control. I mean, when you're going into a practical location space, it belongs to somebody else. There are certain things that, they are or are not going to allow you to do, whether or not you feel like you'd like to do them to tell the story that you have to tell. Time and resource, the real world offers wonderful surprises. Sometimes you discover things that you weren't looking for that become little character beats. I think about some of the details inside the Mutiny House. You can do a lot of research and you think, oh, it's a little bit of character detail here from the early part of the 20th century. And then you walk into a place and you're like, oh, wow, I've never seen it quite like that, with these little, round balls on the spindles above the center hallway. And, that's like a great thing. Like, super. And you then steal that and you put it in your set. But yeah, it's really about control for camera, control for lighting, control for weather when you're in a place that's not Los Angeles, where it's, where it's going to rain, it's going to be cold. It might need to be summer when it's winter. All that sort of world building. When you design a set for stage, you're designing it for the needs of the page and the story. You're not looking to put a story into a space that already exists somewhere else. This is an easy way to think about it.
Mm. One of the things that you mentioned about your background is that you worked on Mad Men, and that, this period of time for Halt and Catch Fire was more your life experience, was more your wheelhouse. What were the particular things that really excited you about diving into this time period?
Well, I mean, it's the beginning of the personal computing revolution, which is something that as a teenager I got to experience firsthand, which I thought was pretty fascinating. My dad was an engineer, and we had the computer that Gordon and Donna have in their kitchen in our house when I was growing up. It's like, just like that kind of stuff for me was like personal touchstone. Like, this is a thing. It's a real, it's you remember the time. And I think it helped. Certainly, the decorator who I worked with on the first 2 years of the series is also a person of a similar age and, similar vintage experience level. And so for us, it was great to, interact and be able to find things that, were the occasional new things, but many more of the well-worn and lived in things for all the characters.
Yeah. And that resonates for me as well. As I think about this whole diving into the period piece of it all idea, and some of the things that you've said here, it's not always easy to acquire the things that you need to make these sets look the way that they're supposed to, or make these locations look the way they're supposed to. So when you're planning things out, knowing that budget is going to be a factor for everything that you do and what you can get, but not necessarily knowing all of the little things that you're going to have to find along the way until you start getting the full, every script. How do you sort of keep it open? How do you factor in budget and also factor in, we're probably going to have to get some hard to find items?
Sure. I mean, the biggest mantra for doing period work is you try and not have anything be from the future. You can always justify something that feels funky and old. Why is that car from the 1950s parked on the street? Some guy collects cars that are 30 years old, but you can't have a 1992 Camaro parked in the frame because it'll be not existing yet. And that attitude, I think, drives everything, whether it's building architecture, whether it's props, whether it's decorating items in a space. And it's like that's sort of like, is it from the past? It's okay. That can be it's all right. I'm going to let go of it not being exactly what I want because it can actually be plausible. But in terms of like preparing, the biggest thing that, as I recall, we needed to develop for the first season of the show was the portable computer. And that was not something that I knew going into the beginning of the season. Because I don't know that Chris and Chris had necessarily mapped out that was the thing that was going to be the object that drives the climax of the comdeck sequence, whether you call it a giant or whether you call it a slingshot. So that development process began, I want to say maybe 4 episodes in. I got an aside from Jeff Freilich, the producer, saying, "Hey, so we got the treatments for the final episodes, and we're going to need this." And so it was like, okay, well, what does that mean? What does it have to do? It has to be, it has to be something that's plausible. It has to be something that is different. It can't be, well, let's go get one of these things from the past and just stick a new label on it. Somebody's going to say, hey, that's just a whatever that they stuck a new label on. We wanted to make sure that we had a reasonable size object with reasonable functionality that was different enough from stuff that was actually produced that it would still feel real for the story. And I think we succeeded on that. I mean, certainly we looked at things from the period that opened up, that folded, how keyboards were integrated, where disk drives went, how all of that stuff worked. But ultimately, we had illustration and concept work done, and then we had the machine fabricated at a specialty house in Los Angeles and sent out to us because we knew that we needed to do a whole bunch of tricks as well as look like a computer. It needed to be 2 different machines. It needed to come apart and go back together in a couple different phases so that you needed guts on the inside. It couldn't just be a stiff plastic shell that didn't work. We wanted to see things on the screen. We wanted it to be interactive. And so that was certainly the curveball challenge that I remember from the first year of the show. Like, oh, okay, this is it's a fun challenge, but nonetheless, you're like, okay, how much time do we have? When is this gonna go to camera? What's it gonna look like?
And now you have to be a tech expert to create
right.
this thing.
Thankfully, the show, I've forgotten the gentleman's name, but the show had a technical consultant on from the pilot talking
Carl
about how. Yes, Carl.
Yeah.
Talking about like, this is a breadboard. This is how you would reverse engineer this machine. This is how you would get to this. This is how you would discover that. And it's like, I can take a little bit of it in, but I'm I'm no expert. So you always want to lean on the people who actually know what they're talking about. And you say like, what if we did this? Like, yeah, that'd be great. That'd be fine. Okay. Carl says it's okay, Chris. It's good.
It's great. Yeah, that's perfect. It makes me curious if so there's in season one there was an episode with a character named Simon Church who comes in and he's meant to be sort of the visual design. He's proposing a visual design for the giant. And he comes in with actual plans, like designs and drawings. We don't see them up close, but they exist on screen. And were those things that you were all actually working off of?
We created for the show. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. So much detail goes into this. Were there any particular favorite locations or sets or items that you got to work on in this for you, just as a personal aside?
I don't know. It sounds silly, but the Clark house was like super comfortable and fun. You know, we got to do some fun wallpaper. We got to do some fun colors. I think everybody felt like it felt real, which is always important to me. I don't like to have spaces that feel like sets. I like to have spaces that feel like they're real places for people to inhabit. I think it helps the actors develop and present character. I'm trying to remember season 2.
I mean, season 2, we've got, of course, Mutiny was a huge location, but Sarah and Joe, they have a whole apartment.
I mean, that apartment was fun. I mean, that's like quintessential 80s apartment. Like, as I said, golden oak and white tile, parquet floor, super fun, small, a total, not a total 180, but a 180 from where Joe started the show in terms of what he's looking at the second time around. I will say that, one of the things about television is oftentimes when you're a resource challenged, you end up recycling or reusing or adapting one space to become another space. The IBM computer room that Joe is working next to as you open season 2 is adapted and recycled Cardiff Electric stuff. Change paint color, change flooring, change ceiling light arrangements, install giant blue and white IBM machinery instead of Hewlett Packard terminals on wood grain desks, and you've got yourself a different kind of computer lab and a different kind of space for him to inhabit. But I think maybe one of the more successful things that transformed across season 1 at the end was we leave Joe's apartment behind, and the word is, nope, it's not in the show anymore. We're never going to shoot it there again. We're not going to need it anymore. And the bones of that built environment turned into all of the hotel suites that the characters are in Comdex. And I feel like it's a successful moment because you don't feel, when I design, you don't feel like they're the same space just with a new coat of paint on it. It's a successful bait and switch, which is financially prudent, so that you can take the characters someplace new with using the stuff that you've already established and created in the first part of the series.
Were there any big wins for you? So I'm wondering about like any really hard to find things or anything that you fought for that you weren't sure you were going to get across the line, but then you did. What were some of the things that really were a fight, but a fight that you all won and got it to be the way that you wanted it?
I think the look of the computers in season 1, there was a lot of conversation about like, what kind of technology did they have? What kind of space is this? It's like it's the IBM PC is just coming out, so everybody doesn't have IBM PCs on their desktop. There's some kind of machine that is connected to some other giant machine somewhere else in the building. using a lot of electricity to do, much less than your smartphone is capable of doing today. And sourcing sourcing all of those terminals and making sure that there was a uniformity across the bullpen so that everybody felt like, you're sitting down and this is what you're given. It's much like the typewriters in the first Sterling Cooper office in Mad Men. Everybody sits down, there's this thing, everybody has the same tools to work with. And finding those machines was a big challenge for the pilot. Thankfully, once we had them for the pilot, we had them for the first year of the show. But I would say that would be the thing that was sort of, the second season brought us into the world of the Commodore 64, which was something that was I will say option, use that term loosely, in terms of like available technology when we were trying to do the pilot, but it wasn't the right thing for that office. Again, not the kind of machinery that these people would be using as professionals. So the need to keep the technology on task, I think, was successful from my point of view for the first year.
It's amazing. What a huge job this must have been. What details do you want to make sure the fans spot? Any Easter eggs that you might have put in there? Any particular things that people who were on your team or you really wanted to make sure got on the show and sort of found their way in there? What was planted that you want to make sure we don't miss?
Well, I was going to say the thing that the small detail that was amusing to us when the show was rolling out for the first time was there was a little bit of commentary about whether or not the soda brand was real. There's a lot of soda being consumed, and Ranger Orange is a completely fictitious brand of soda, but we styled the packaging correctly enough so that people were thinking, is that a real thing? Is that just like a local Texas soft drink? So it's not like Dr. Pepper, but that was the thing that I was, sure you're pleased by when you think that you've created something that everybody thinks might have been an actual thing.
I think I've asked that very question on this podcast. That's so great. Yeah, I mean, to create something that feels as believable as that, especially when it's mixed in with other products that did exist and people kind of can't tell the difference. That's incredible.
You want it to be as seamless as possible.
I also think about something like, in season 1, there's a whole episode where Gordon's trying to find Cabbage Patch Kids. And there's what a specific product. I mean, I'm sure that you can find Cabbage Patch Kids out there, but you also had all the packaging and there was a whole window display of them. And that's a really specific world to have to dive into for an episode. What goes into something like that?
A lot of research, and then trying to figure out what you can acquire, and then if you can acquire the doll but not the packaging, trying to re-engineer so that you can rebuild and recreate the packaging. Looking for marketing information about how they were displayed in stores. I mean, they were a craze. There's a reason that he can't find them anywhere in the story. It's because that was real life. So there's enough documentation about what that was like to be able to rebuild and remanufacture the things that are outside of just the dolls themselves.
There was a really interesting blog, I think from a fan of the show, that went out many years ago about their take that the RGB color palette was an important one to the show. And I think this particular blog equated blue with Joe, red with Donna, green with Gordon, and didn't really address Cameron. And they made some very good cases. And I think that if you kind of go through the seasons, you will see examples of this, but how much of that was accurate to what you were trying to do in the show? Or was there even like a particular theme around locations or characters?
No, I mean, the textural and surface pitch that I mentioned earlier, that was pretty much as far as I went in terms of some kind of didactic, overarching layer of thought. I did not deal with RGB, and I will say, uh, while Donna evolves over the course of 4 seasons of the show, she was not one of the three major players going into the first year. I mean, if anything, it was Gordon, and then it became Donna and Gordon as a couplet, not very Donna focused at all. And I think that's to the credit of Chris and Chris that they recognized where the strong dynamic character growth could happen and let that play out. Especially in 3 and 4, which I was not a part of. But so no RGB for me.
Were there any other consistent ties for because the thing is, characters are the same person, through all the seasons, but they also grow and develop a lot. And so I can see, for example, with Joe, I mean, you take him out of his season 1 apartment, you put him into season 2 place, and it's like a completely different world that he's in. Were there any consistencies that you were trying to maintain, even as locations changed around the characters?
Well, I mean, there was a little bit of time cut between the end of 1 and the beginning of 2. But, all of the actors have the ability to take the character with them across environments. Lee, Toby, Carrie, Mackenzie, Scoot, they're all fantastic in the show. So I worried less about, a consistency of theme, especially for somebody like Joe, who's, it's a shell and a facade in the first season. So you're like, you want to go into season 2 thinking like, okay, is this the real guy? Or is this just another suit of a different color that he's wearing this time around? And what are we going to find out? I mean,
I love that you just posed that question. That's exactly the question that I've been unpacking in great detail here in season 2. Like, has he changed? Has he?
Do people ever really change?
Yeah, it's a good question for all of us to think about. You've worked on so many, different projects, so many TV series, so many projects over time. What to you stands out as being different about your experience working on this show?
I mean, it was a lot of fun to make. The principal actors, most of the design teams, we were making it in Atlanta, pretending it was Dallas. In 2013, pretending it's 1982, 1982, 1984, as you jump. And so there was a good amount of, camaraderie and sort of like, it's us against the world. We're going to make the best show we can. And it's fun because, it's computers and it's the 1980s, and what's not to love about that? And, it's that esprit de corps, I think, translates in the final product. You would have people who are writing in Los Angeles, and this is before Zoom. So, you have conference calls, not video calls. So there's a challenge to how you're communicating and what people who are needing to sign off creatively are able to see and advance, and how you're convincing people to say, this is the smart choice for us to make to tell this part of the story, and let's push in this direction. All of those things, which are much simpler when everybody's in the same place, or even now everybody can be like us on either side of the computer screen having a dialogue, weren't truly functional then.
Along the way in some of your answers, you've made reference to, or we've talked a little bit about the many different people that you were working with to make all of this happen. I wanted to give you an opportunity here. who are some of the people that you worked with that we should know what they did, and you want to shout them out here, make sure we've heard their name?
I would say two people who stayed with the show after I departed, and offered significant contributions to other designers who were on the show, not just me, were um, Cameron Beasley, who was the art director for the episodic seasonal work for for me for 1 and 2, and I want to say for maybe the whole show. Maybe he stayed the entire time. And Lance Totten, who was the set decorator for not for the pilot, but for uh, seasons 1 and 2, and I think 4. I think he stepped away for a minute, but then returned to close things out. And they are wonderful people as well as very talented individuals. And certainly, both people that I'm still in contact with today, 12 years after or 10 years after we finished the show, um, just to say hello and see what's going on in their world, even if I'm not going to Atlanta to design a television show and I'm looking for their help.
Yeah, thank you for dropping those names. I mean, it's just amazing how much detail went into this show, and there are some people whose faces are very recognizable, but there are a lot of people whose names we should know that haven't always come up from conversation among fans. So I'm glad that we're able to highlight them. What are you up to now, or maybe I should revise that after all of the strikes have been happening, and I know things are a little bit weird in the industry. So, like, what have you worked on since Halt and Catch Fire that you'd like to acknowledge or make sure that we've seen?
So, I mean, I'm at a place in my career where I do a little bit of art direction still on the feature film side as well as design. So since Halt, I did the first couple seasons of Insecure for Issa Rae, which is a very different vibe than Halt and Catch Fire. Um, I'm currently working on a project that I can't talk about as a supervising art director. It'll be probably 2025 when it gets released in theaters or streaming. I don't know what platform they're going to execute it on. But yeah, it's been I mean, Hollywood, it's been strange in Hollywood for the past 3 years from the pandemic on. So here we are picking up the pieces. Hope to be making a film on the East Coast in July. We'll see if all the chips fall in the right spaces to make that happen.
Well, we'll all have to keep an eye on your IMDb profile to see what's released and when, and keep following your work. But thank you so much for doing this. It was so interesting to talk with you. I guess before I let you go, is there anything that you wish I would have asked that I didn't? Is there anything else that we should know about the work that you did on the show?
No, I mean we talked about most things. I mean, I will say it was super exciting to be in the room and working with people. I mean, it was Chris and Chris's first television project that they were writing and producing, and so working with Jeff Freilich, Melissa Bernstein, Mark Johnson, and the producers to shepherd those two very talented, creative gentlemen through their first foray into television was a lot of fun. It makes it, when it's a project that everybody cares about and everybody's invested in, it's not traumatizing is the wrong word, but there's you feel like you have a little bit more skin in the game for trying to like make sure that the thing that is going to be their first gig is right on many levels.
It feels like that was a successful goal. I mean, I just top to bottom, the show just has so much wonderful detail to it. And I have to say, the episode recaps that I've been doing, I mean, they've gotten longer and longer, and I'm sharing feedback that's getting longer and longer. And there are shows that you could deep dive into and you'd find there wasn't a lot under the surface. And I've had that happen. And this one, there's always more. Like, no matter how long a recap I do, there's always stuff I missed. There's always new angles to look at. And I think that is very much to the credit of you, your team, everybody who worked on it in different departments. It was just so meticulously thought out. So, thank you for all the work that you did on this show.
Thank you. Nice to talk about it.
Yeah. And to everybody who's listening to this, you know what to do. Go out there and watch Halt and Catch Fire. Bye, everybody.